Okay, so sources of EU law, and there are going to be some cases that we can talk about. First of all, treaties, like the Treaty of Rome. Remember, that was the one that helped set up the EU, and the Treaty of Lisbon. So what is a treaty? Okay, well, it's a bit of paper essentially, but once a treaty is signed, it is automatically applicable in those member states. So the law is what we call directly applicable. So you don't need an act of parliament to implement it. So, for example, the EU decides that this treaty is law, and then all 27 countries have to follow it. They don't have to introduce their own act of parliament to implement it. So they have what we call direct effect. So an individual can rely upon that treaty. So a case example of Connaughton, I think that's how you pronounce it, Connaughton. So Mrs. C left a job and was replaced by a man who was paid more. So she was allowed to make a claim because she said that was unfair, rightly so. Second source of law, regulations. Again, these are what we call directly applicable. So when the EU makes a regulation, it just automatically applies to all 27 countries. So it's issued by the Council of the EU. Regulations are binding on member states. They have to follow them. Now, the case example is the tachograph example. Now, this was about lorry drivers having these things fitted, these electronic things fitted that would tell them when they needed to take a break and register the number of hours they were driving, because it's quite a dangerous job. So the tachograph case, the UK government delayed installing the equipment in lorries, and regulation had been made saying you have to install these things in lorries, and the UK was just slow to do so. And the court basically turned around, Court of Justice of the EU turned around and said, well, member states, you don't have a choice with regulations. Article 288 is clear that regulations apply automatically. You have to do this. So now, we do this. Okay, the third source of EU law, directives. Now, these cover many topics like insurance, health and safety. So member states pass their own laws to implement the directives. So we're told that this is a directive. Please make your own law to implement this. And the EU Commission will set a time limit depending what the directive is on. So we would make an act, or we did make an act of parliament or a statutory instrument. So there's a case called Marshall. Miss Marshall was required to retire at 62, but men didn't have to retire until 65. So English law said, that's fine, that's our law. But there was an equal treatment directive that existed, and it said that men and women should be treated in the same way. So member states need to follow that directive, and then we passed an act of parliament to change the law. So now men and women retire at the same age. Okay, the other thing just to bear in mind is that what is the impact of EU law over law in England and Wales? Now, obviously, this all feels a little bit out of date because we have left the EU, but just kind of like bear with me. So EU law takes precedence over national law. That was a case of Costa that said that. So if you're like, oh, do I follow the EU law or do I follow the UK law? Let's pretend it's before 2020, you would have to follow the EU law. So it's like it's at the top of the hierarchy. Examples of this, Factor Tame is a case to do with fishing waters. They were arguing about fishing waters, and Factor Tame said EU law takes precedence over national law, even where you have a different law in your own country. Okay, another example is McCarthy's Limited. So Smith's employers paid her less than the man who did the job before. So, straight away I'm thinking, oh, discrimination. So they weren't employed at the same time, and English law said, well, that's okay. It's not okay if you're employed at the same time. So Smith claimed the company was in breach of Article 157 from the Treaty of Lisbon over equal pay, and the court agreed with her. So she now would have to be paid equally. We've already spoken about the tachograph case, but remember that was a regulation that lorries were fitted with tachographs. The UK didn't implement this, they left it up to the lorry owners, and the CJEU said the UK was wrong. Regulation is law in the UK, and now we've changed the law. Couple of key terms to be aware of. Vertical direct effect. This means an individual can claim against the state even when a directive has not been implemented by the state, so Marshall. Horizontal direct effect. An individual can rely on EU directives to bring a claim against the member state, even if not implemented. So you can't claim against an individual. Okay, so we've spoken about Mrs. Marshall, but just to kind of reiterate, she was required to retire, remember, at 62, men retire at 65. Under English law, not discrimination. The court said it is, so yeah, they should let her retire at 65. And then another case called Frankovic. The Italian government failed to implement a directive protecting employees' wages if the firm went bankrupt. So they should have implemented that. So the court said that Frankovic was entitled to compensation from the state as they failed to implement a directive. They should have implemented it, and they didn't. So that is a brief overview of EU law. Let me know if you have any questions.